I was just about to head to my sister Caroline's house for a reconciliation dinner when my lawyer texted me, "Do not go, it is a trap." What he uncovered about her secret plan changed everything. My name is Jillian and I am 33 years old. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a highly successful health data analytics firm. My family always treated my career like a silly little computer hobby. Little did they know I was not about to run away from their trap. I was about to walk right through their front door and watch their entire world burn. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who completely underestimated you. Driving up to the pristine iron gates of my parents' house in a wealthy Chicago suburb always made my stomach turn. William and Patricia. My parents cared about exactly two things in this world, which were appearances, and my older sister Caroline. The sprawling Tudor-style mansion with its perfectly manicured lawn even in late November was a monument to their obsession with looking like old money. The driveway was already packed with luxury cars, including the custom matte black sports car belonging to my brother-in-law Terrence. Terrence is a highly charismatic African-American man who runs what he calls an elite investment fund. He and Caroline have always been the golden couple of our family. Terrence wore tailored suits, threw money around at country clubs, and my parents absolutely worshipped the ground he walked on. To them, Terrence was the brilliant business genius they always wanted in the family. I, on the other hand, was just Jillian, the disappointment who spent too much time staring at screens and typing code. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be completely different. For the past 4 years, I had politely declined their holiday invitations, preferring the absolute peace of my downtown penthouse and the company of my actual friends. I had built my company from the ground up, writing code in a cramped apartment, until my health data algorithms caught the attention of major hospital networks across the country. I am completely self-made, but my family never bothered to ask how I paid my bills or how my business actually functioned. To them, I was just playing on the internet. But a week ago, my mother had called me crying on the phone. She said she missed her youngest daughter so much. She claimed our father had some recent health scares, and they finally realized life was too short for family estrangement. She practically begged me to come to Thanksgiving dinner, adding very casually at the end of the call that they just needed my signature as a neutral witness on some routine retirement trust updates. It sounded so mundane and so boringly normal. Family asks for a small legal favor, and family makes amends over turkey. It was the perfect bait. I parked my car at the very end of the long driveway, gripping the steering wheel for a long moment before stepping out into the biting Illinois cold. I wore a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, deliberately downplaying my personal wealth. If I showed up in designer clothes and diamond jewelry, my mother would immediately accuse me of putting on airs or drowning in massive credit card debt. That was her absolute favorite narrative to spin to her friends. Poor, struggling Jillian, desperate for attention and living beyond her means. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind, grabbed the bottle of vintage wine I had brought as a peace offering, and walked up the cobblestone path. Through the massive bay windows, I could clearly see them gathered in the living room. The large stone fireplace was roaring. Terrence was holding a crystal glass of scotch, gesturing grandly with his hands while my father laughed and clapped him affectionately on the shoulder. Caroline was draped over the sofa arm, looking like she had just stepped out of a fashion catalog, completely soaking up all the attention in the room. My mother was arranging appetizers on a silver platter with her usual frantic need for visual perfection. It looked exactly like a holiday greeting card if holiday greeting cards featured covert narcissists. My hand was literally reaching for the heavy brass door knocker when my phone started vibrating violently in my coat pocket. It was not just a single buzz, but a continuous frantic vibration that demanded immediate attention. I pulled it out, feeling annoyed by the sudden interruption. It was Harrison, my corporate attorney, and one of the sharpest legal minds in the city of Chicago. We had been working tirelessly on a massive national expansion for my company, I swiped the screen open to read the text message. The message was typed entirely in capital letters. Do not walk into that house. Get back in your car right now. Call me the second you are safe. My heart slammed heavily against my ribs. I quickly dialed his number, stepping off the front porch and ducking behind a large stone pillar completely out of sight from the living room windows. Harrison answered the phone on the very first ring. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice tight with an urgency I had never heard from him before. I just ran a deep background check on the notary your mother is using for tonight. He is an old college buddy of your brother-in-law Terrence. I dug much deeper into the public filings they prepared. Jillian, it is a trap. I stood there while the freezing wind whipped my hair across my face, feeling completely paralyzed. A trap for what I asked, my breath pluming in the cold winter air. They are not asking you to witness a simple retirement fund, Harrison explained, the words hitting me like heavy physical blows. The cover page might say it is a retirement trust, but the actual legally binding pages buried deep in the middle of that stack constitute a full, durable power of attorney. They have secretly drafted a document that transfers total voting control and absolute financial authority of your company directly to Terrence. They are trying to blindside you into signing away your entire business tonight. The heavy glass bottle of wine nearly slipped from my freezing fingers. I leaned back against the rough stone pillar, my mind racing at light speed to process the sheer scale of this family betrayal. My parents had not invited me here to reconcile our differences. They had not called me because they genuinely missed their daughter. They had lured me to this Thanksgiving dinner to rob me blind. They wanted to hand my entire life's work, the multi-million-dollar health data firm I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears, to their golden boy son-in-law. Terrence, the flashy investment manager, suddenly needed to seize my corporate assets. Why did he need them? What was actually going on with his supposed financial empire that he desperately needed to steal mine? The sheer audacity of their plan was absolutely breathtaking. They honestly believed I was stupid enough to blindly sign a thick stack of legal papers between bites of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce just because I was desperate for their parental affection. I hung up the phone with Harrison, promising him I would call back later with a plan of action. I looked down the long driveway at my car. The smart and safe thing to do would be to get in, drive straight back to my secure downtown penthouse, and let my corporate lawyers handle them from a safe distance. I could block all their phone numbers, cut them off permanently, and never look back at these terrible people again. But as I stared through the glass window at my family laughing together, raising their expensive glasses in a cheerful toast, probably celebrating the massive corporate heist they were about to pull off, a cold and hard rage settled over my entire body. It completely replaced the hurt. It completely replaced the anxiety. Running away in tears was exactly what the old Jillian would have done years ago. The weak and insecure girl who just wanted her mother to finally love her would have fled into the night. But the woman standing on that freezing porch was a chief executive officer who managed millions of dollars and outsmarted ruthless competitors for a living. I tightened my grip on the wine bottle, squared my shoulders, and stepped out from behind the stone pillar. I was absolutely not going to run away from them. I was going to walk right into their little legal trap, look them dead in the eyes, and tear their masks completely off. I marched directly up the front steps, reached out with a steady hand, and pressed the doorbell, ready for absolute war. The heavy oak door swung open before my finger even left the doorbell. My mother, Patricia, stood in the grand entryway, wearing a perfectly tailored silk dress and an expression that immediately communicated her absolute disappointment in my existence. Her eyes darted up and down my simple cashmere sweater, taking inventory of my deliberate lack of designer labels. She offered a stiff, rigid hug that felt more like a brief collision of shoulders before stepping back to let me inside. The house smelled of roasted turkey, expensive cinnamon candles, and suffocating pretense. I followed her into the formal dining room, where the rest of the family was already seated around a massive mahogany table. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the expensive china, but the atmosphere was instantly freezing. My older sister Caroline sat perfectly straight next to her husband Terence. At 35, Caroline had perfected the role of the ultimate suburban trophy wife. Her blonde hair was immaculately styled, and she wore a diamond tennis bracelet that she made sure to flash every time she reached for her water glass. Beside her sat Terence, the supposed crown jewel of our family. Terence was a 36-year-old African-American man who carried himself with the loud, aggressive confidence of someone desperate to prove his wealth. He worked as an investment fund manager and made sure absolutely everyone in the room knew it. Tonight, he wore a custom-tailored suit that was far too formal for a family Thanksgiving dinner and a heavy gold watch that caught the light whenever he gestured. My father William sat at the head of the table carving the turkey with practiced precision. He offered me a tight nod, gesturing with the carving knife toward the empty chair at the far end of the table furthest away from him and Terence. I took my seat, placing my napkin on my lap and pasting a calm, pleasant smile on my face. My heart was still pounding from the terrifying phone call with my lawyer, but I forced my breathing to remain perfectly steady. I was sitting at a table with 4 people who were actively conspiring to steal my entire life's work. The psychological warfare began before the first plate was even fully served. So Jillian Caroline started, her voice dripping with that familiar, syrupy condescension she had used since we were teenagers. "Are you still working out of that tiny apartment, doing whatever it is you do with those tech support computers? We were actually worried you would not be able to afford the gas to drive out here tonight." "I manage a health data analytics firm, Caroline," I replied, keeping my tone completely even. "I design predictive software for medical networks." Terence let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the dining room walls. He swirled the expensive red wine in his glass, looking at me with absolute pity. "Analytics, right? That is cute, Jillian. Very modern. You know, if you ever get tired of struggling to find freelance gigs, my investment firm is always looking for basic IT help. We pay a decent hourly wage. It might help you finally get out of that financial rut you are always in." I looked directly into Terrence's eyes. Underneath his flashy exterior and loud bravado, I noticed something highly interesting. A faint sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead, and his hands gripped his wineglass just a fraction too tightly. For a wildly successful investment manager, he looked incredibly stressed. I knew exactly why. According to my lawyer, Terence was drowning in debt and needed to hijack my company to save his own skin. The sheer dramatic irony of him offering me a minimum wage job while plotting to steal my multi-million-dollar enterprise was almost too delicious to interrupt. "That is a very generous offer, Terence," I said smoothly, taking a small bite of my dinner. "But I think I will stick to my own business for now." My mother slammed her silverware down onto her porcelain plate, causing a sharp, ringing sound that silenced the table. She glared at me across the elaborate floral centerpiece. "Glad you finally showed your face at 33. Patricia snapped her voice, dropping its polite hostess facade. "Terrence just closed $1 million investment deal while you are still struggling with those silly computers. You should be begging him for career advice instead of acting so stubborn and ungrateful. We invited you here tonight to include you in this family, despite your constant failures. Make sure you be a good girl and sign the witness papers for the family later. Do not ruin this holiday with your typical dramatic attitude." My father nodded in solemn agreement, pointing his fork at me. "Your mother is right, Jillian. Family means supporting each other. We have a notary waiting in my home office right now. It is just a minor administrative task for our retirement trust. Terrence was kind enough to organize the portfolio for us. We just need a third-party family member to sign the bottom line so we can finalize the transfer tonight. It will take 2 minutes." The blatant manipulation was staggering. They had rehearsed this entire routine perfectly. Demean my career, elevate Terrence as the ultimate financial savior, and frame the legal trap as a tiny, insignificant favor for our aging parents. They were playing on my ingrained childhood guilt, hoping the emotionally starved daughter would blindly sign whatever they put in front of her just to earn a single scrap of parental approval. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, observing the 4 predators sitting at the table. Caroline was smirking at me, clearly enjoying my public reprimand. Terence was trying to look nonchalant, but his foot was bouncing rapidly under the table, betraying his desperate anxiety. My parents looked completely righteous, genuinely believing they had the absolute right to demand my blind obedience. "I am so happy for your success, Terence," I said, setting my glass down gently. "$1 million deal is quite an achievement in this current market. Tell me, does your new investment strategy typically involve taking over shell companies? Or do you prefer acquiring stable medical data firms to leverage for emergency capital?" The dining room went dead silent. The heavy silver carving knife in my father's hand stopped moving. Caroline blinked rapidly, her smug smile freezing instantly on her face. Terence swallowed hard, the color draining slightly from his confident expression. He stared at me, his jaw clenching as he tried to figure out if my incredibly specific question was just a lucky guess, or if I knew exactly what was hiding inside that stack of legal papers waiting in the home office. The rest of the holiday meal was an excruciating exercise in silent tension. My mother desperately tried to steer the conversation back to meaningless country club gossip, while Caroline and Terence exchanged nervous, anxious glances. We suffered through the remainder of the roasted turkey and dry stuffing in a suffocating atmosphere. The moment the dessert plates were cleared away, my father cleared his throat loudly, signaling that the main event of the evening had finally arrived. Terence stood up from his chair, smoothing his custom suit jacket with an arrogant swagger. He walked over to a leather briefcase resting on the side console and pulled out a thick manila folder. He walked back and dropped the heavy file onto the mahogany table right next to my half-empty wine glass. He clicked a heavy gold pen and pushed it directly toward me. His smile was wide, perfectly practiced, and completely utterly fake. "Just a few standard signatures, Jillian," he said, tapping the top page casually with his manicured finger. "It is mostly boring banking compliance for your parents' retirement accounts. We have a notary waiting in the home office to stamp it, but you can sign the core pages right here at the table. Just initial on the yellow sticky tabs and sign the bottom line. It will save us all a massive headache, and we can get back to celebrating the holiday as a family." Caroline leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a greedy, hungry anticipation she could not hide. My parents watched me with bated breath, fully expecting their obedient disappointment of a daughter to quickly comply and seek their fleeting approval. I picked up the heavy gold pen, turning it slowly in my fingers. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. I did not sign. Instead, I placed the pen down firmly on the table and pulled the thick folder closer to me. Terence shifted his weight uncomfortably. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Come on, Jillian," he urged, his voice tightening slightly. "It is just basic legal jargon. There is no need to overthink it." I ignored him completely. I flipped past the innocent-looking cover page. I bypassed the standard financial disclosures on pages 2 and 3. I turned directly to page 4. I ran my index finger down the thick paper, stopping at a dense paragraph of microscopic print buried intentionally beneath a massive wall of generic legal text. "Let us see what we are actually signing tonight," I said, my voice ringing crystal clear and dangerously calm across the silent dining room. I began reading the text aloud, enunciating every single syllable so absolutely nobody could pretend they misheard me. "In consideration of mutual familial obligations, the undersigned hereby irrevocably assigns, transfers, and conveys all voting rights, financial authority, and executive control of the limited liability company currently registered under the undersigned name to Terence Williams as the designated acting trustee." The color drained entirely from Caroline's face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. My father gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. My mother gasped sharply, her hand flying up to clutch her pearl necklace. Terence took a massive step back, his eyes darting wildly toward the hallway as if he was desperately looking for an escape route. "Did you honestly think I would not read the fine print, Terence?" I stood up, pushing my heavy oak chair back so forcefully it scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Did you seriously think I was just a naive little girl playing on a computer who would blindly hand over a multi-million-dollar health data firm to a failing investment manager drowning in bad debt? Terrence stammered, raising his hands defensively, his voice cracking with panic. Jillian, you are completely misunderstanding the legal structure. It is just a temporary asset allocation to maximize the family portfolio. I can explain the leverage to you. I did not let him finish his pathetic, desperate lie. I grabbed the entire stack of legal documents and ripped them violently down the middle. The thick paper tore with a loud, satisfying rip that echoed through the room. I gathered the halves and tore them again and again, putting every ounce of my anger into the motion, until the fraudulent contract was nothing but a handful of useless shredded paper. I threw the torn pieces directly into his face. The shredded paper rained down over his expensive tailored suit like a pathetic celebration of his own sheer stupidity. He stumbled backward, brushing the paper off his shoulders, his face contorted with absolute rage and humiliation. Before he could utter a single word of protest, I picked up my crystal glass of red wine. I did not hesitate for a second. I launched the deep crimson liquid straight at his chest. The vintage wine splashed violently against his crisp white designer shirt, blooming into a massive dark red stain that ruined the expensive fabric instantly. The red liquid dripped down his tailored vest and splashed onto the expensive imported rug. Terrence let out a loud shout of pure shock, looking down at his ruined suit with wide, terrified eyes. Caroline shrieked, jumping up from her chair to dab frantically at his chest with a linen napkin, her perfect holiday facade completely shattered. My mother screamed my name in absolute horror, her voice echoing shrilly in the grand dining room. The perfectly staged holiday dinner had officially descended into absolute chaos. But I stood there perfectly calm, feeling a massive surge of pure adrenaline and absolute control. The mask was entirely ripped off. They had invited a sheep to the slaughter, but they finally realized they were locked in a room with a predator. The sound of the heavy crystal glass hitting the mahogany table was the only warning before my father absolutely exploded. William did not turn his anger toward the man who had just attempted to commit massive corporate fraud in his dining room. Instead, he slammed both of his heavy fists down onto the table so hard that the expensive china rattled and a water glass tipped over, spilling onto the lace tablecloth. "Have you lost your mind, Gillian?" My father roared, his face turning a dark, violent shade of red. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, completely ignoring the red wine dripping from his precious son-in-law's designer shirt. "Your company is not worth a single dime. It is a worthless little startup. Terrence is stuck in a tight cash flow rotation right now. So what if you sign the authorization for your brother-in-law to use as collateral? You are a selfish brat." I stood completely frozen, not from fear, but from the sheer staggering weight of his confession. My own father, the man who was supposed to protect me, had just openly admitted to orchestrating this entire legal ambush. He knew exactly what was hidden inside that stack of papers. He knew Terrence was planning to steal my corporate identity and use my business as a sacrificial lamb for his failing investment fund. My mother, Patricia, did not even flinch at my father's explosive outburst. Instead, she rushed to Terrence's side, grabbing a linen napkin to dab frantically at his ruined shirt, as if I had just assaulted a visiting dignitary. She looked at me with an expression of absolute pure disgust. "Look at what you have done," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "We invite you into our beautiful home for the holidays, and you behave like a wild animal. Terrence is a real businessman, Jillian. He provides for your sister. He maintains this family's reputation in the community. He just needed to borrow your little computer company on paper to secure a bridge loan. Families are supposed to help each other, but you have always been so incredibly selfish and ungrateful." I looked from my mother to my father and finally to Caroline. My perfect older sister was clutching Terrence's arm, her eyes wide with panic, but there was no shock on her face regarding the fraud. There was only panic that their brilliant plan had failed. "You knew," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "All of you knew. You lured me here under the guise of a Thanksgiving reconciliation just to serve me up on a silver platter so Terrence could commit bank fraud using my name. Caroline sneered, stepping out from behind her husband. Her sweet sisterly facade melted away instantly, revealing the ugly, entitled greed underneath. "Oh, please, Jillian, stop being so dramatic," she snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "Terrence's fund is just facing a temporary liquidity issue. It happens to highly successful wealth managers all the time. Your stupid little health data business barely makes enough to pay your rent. Terrence was going to use your company profile to secure a line of credit, and he would have given it back to you in 6 months. You should be honored that a real financial executive even found a use for your silly hobby." The absolute delusion in her voice was breathtaking. They genuinely believed my multi-million-dollar analytics firm, the one currently finalizing contracts with 3 of the largest hospital networks in North America, was just a worthless little hobby. They were willing to forge my signature, commit identity theft, and completely destroy my financial future just to maintain the illusion that Terrence was a self-made millionaire. They were willing to let me take the legal fall when Terrence's shady bridge loans inevitably defaulted. For 33 years, I had carried a heavy, aching weight in my chest. It was the desperate longing of a daughter who just wanted her parents to look at her with the same pride they reserved for her sister. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love by getting perfect grades, by staying out of trouble, by building a successful career without ever asking them for a single penny. I always thought that if I just worked a little harder or became a little more successful, they would finally love me. But as I stood in that opulent dining room, looking at the 4 people who shared my blood, I felt that heavy, aching weight completely evaporate. It did not leave behind sadness. It did not leave behind tears. My eyes were completely dry. I did not feel the urge to cry or scream or beg for their understanding. I just felt an icy, absolute clarity. They were not my family. They were a ring of desperate narcissistic parasites willing to cannibalize their own daughter to protect their fake country club status. "You are insane," my father barked, taking a step toward me. "You are going to sit back down in that chair right now, and you are going to sign a clean copy of those documents. You owe this family, Jillian. We fed you. We clothed you. We put a roof over your head. You will do this for your sister, and you will do it tonight." I reached down and picked up my cashmere coat from the back of my chair. I slid my arms into the sleeves, taking my time, deliberately making them wait. The room was suffocating with their desperate, toxic energy, but I had never breathed easier in my entire life. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling with an eerie, chilling calmness. "I bought the food I ate. I paid for my own clothes since I was 16. I paid my own college tuition working night shifts while you bought Caroline a new luxury car every 2 years. You did not build me, you did not support me, and you are certainly not going to destroy me to save a pathetic fraud of a man." I turned my gaze to Terrence, who was still standing there clutching his wine-stained shirt. "I suggest you start looking for a very good defense attorney, Terrence, because corporate fraud and attempted identity theft carry mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison," my mother gasped, clutching her chest. "You would not dare threaten your own family!" she shrieked. I picked up my purse and looked directly into my father's furious, bulging eyes. "I am not threatening you," I stated flatly, the corners of my mouth turning up into a cold, humorless smile. "I am making a promise." I turned my back on the 4 of them, refusing to listen to another word of their toxic gaslighting. As I walked out of the formal dining room and headed straight for the heavy oak front door, I heard my father screaming my name, demanding that I come back. I did not even break my stride. I pulled the heavy door open, letting the freezing Chicago wind rush into the stifling house. "See you in court," I said over my shoulder. I stepped out into the freezing night, pulling the door shut behind me with a loud, definitive slam that severed my ties to that house forever. I walked down the long cobblestone driveway toward my car, my head held high. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I felt an intense, blazing heat radiating from within. The war had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea who they had just chosen to fight. The sharp mechanical beep of the point-of-sale terminal cut through the soft, ambient music of the luxury Oak Street boutique. I watched the polished sales associate frown slightly as she stared at the screen. She tried running my heavy metal premium credit card a second time. Another loud, obnoxious beep immediately followed. "I am so sorry, madam," she said, her voice dropping to a discreet whisper to avoid drawing the attention of the other wealthy Black Friday shoppers. "The system is declining the transaction. Would you happen to have another method of payment?" I blinked in genuine confusion. I was purchasing 3 custom-tailored suits to wear for my upcoming corporate legal battles against my family, and the total was roughly $6,000. The card I handed her was tied directly to a personal checking account holding well over $1 million in liquid cash. There was absolutely no logical reason for a decline. "There must be a glitch in your network," I replied smoothly, reaching back into my leather handbag. I pulled out a different platinum card from a completely separate bank. "Try this one instead." She swiped the second card. The machine flashed a bright red warning light and emitted a third aggressive beep. I felt a sudden cold prickle of unease at the back of my neck. 2 different premium cards from 2 different financial institutions being declined simultaneously was not a simple network error. I offered the sales associate a tight, polite smile, excusing myself to step out onto the freezing Chicago sidewalk. I immediately dialed the direct line to my private wealth manager. The phone rang for less than 10 seconds before he answered. "David," I said, keeping my voice low and authoritative. "I am standing on the Magnificent Mile, and 2 of my personal cards were just declined. I need you to tell me exactly what is going on with my accounts right now." There was a heavy, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Jillian," he finally said, sounding deeply apologetic but highly stressed. "I was just about to call you. You have a massive lock on your entire personal financial profile. A level red fraud alert was triggered early this morning. Our fraud department was forced to temporarily freeze every single personal asset tied to your social security number." I pulled my cashmere coat tighter around my shoulders against the biting wind. "A fraud alert," I repeated. "That is impossible. I have not reported any fraudulent activity on my accounts." "You did not report it," Jillian David explained carefully. "Your mother Patricia did." I stopped walking entirely. The bitter wind whipping off Lake Michigan suddenly felt completely insignificant compared to the absolute ice flooding my veins. "My mother?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "How can my mother freeze my personal accounts? She has absolutely zero access to my private wealth." David sighed heavily over the phone. "She does not have access to your primary wealth, Jillian, but she used a very old loophole. Do you remember a basic student checking account you opened at a local suburban branch when you were 18 years old?" The memory hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The summer before I left for college, my mother had dragged me to our local suburban bank. She aggressively insisted on opening a joint emergency checking account, claiming it was the only way she could send me grocery money while I was away at school. It was entirely a manipulation tactic to monitor my college spending, but I had been far too young to realize it back then. I had not used that account or even thought about it in over a decade. I never formally removed her name from the paperwork. David continued explaining the brutal mechanics of their ambush. "Patricia walked into a branch at exactly 9 this morning, accompanied by a man claiming to be her financial advisor. They filed an emergency fraud dispute on that joint account, claiming identity theft and severe financial exploitation by you. Because the banking system links all your personal accounts through your social security number, a high-level fraud dispute from a joint account holder automatically triggers a mandatory federal freeze across your entire consumer profile. It is a standard automated security protocol for elder abuse claims." The sheer malicious brilliance of the attack left me momentarily speechless. This was Terrence. This dirty, underhanded tactic had his slimy, desperate fingerprints all over it. He could not force me to sign away my multi-million-dollar company at the Thanksgiving table, so he decided to hit me where he assumed it would hurt the most. He weaponized my own mother's financial connection to completely suffocate me. He thought I was living paycheck to paycheck. He thought that by freezing my personal debit and credit cards, I would not be able to buy groceries, pay my rent, or hire a lawyer. He honestly believed that cutting off my cash flow would break my spirit. He pictured me sitting in my apartment, terrified and starving, completely isolated from the world. He expected me to come crawling back to their suburban mansion by Sunday morning, begging them to lift the fraud alert, falling to my knees to sign his corporate takeover documents just so I could survive the week. It was the classic playbook of a narcissistic abuser: isolate the victim, strip away their resources, force them into absolute submission. "Can you lift the freeze?" I asked David, keeping my voice entirely devoid of panic. "I am pushing the legal department to expedite it," David assured me. But because she filed it under elder financial abuse statutes, federal regulations require a mandatory investigation period. It could take up to 72 hours to untangle this mess and restore your access. "I am incredibly sorry, Jillian." "Do not apologize, David," I said, a sharp, dangerous smile slowly forming on my face. "You just gave me exactly the information I needed." I ended the call and stood on the busy Chicago street watching eager shoppers hurry past with their holiday bags. Terrence and my mother had just fired their first major weapon. They spent their Black Friday morning sitting in a bank lobby actively lying to federal institutions just to destroy my life. They thought they had backed me into a dark corner. What Terrence, in his infinite arrogance, completely failed to realize was that I am the chief executive officer of a highly profitable corporation. My personal consumer accounts were frozen, but my corporate banking infrastructure, the accounts holding the massive operational capital of my health data firm, was registered under a completely separate employer identification number. My corporate wealth was housed in an entirely different financial institution, completely untouchable by my mother's pathetic joint account loophole. Terrence wanted to play dirty financial games. He wanted to use banking technicalities to destroy my life. He thought he was dealing with the helpless, insecure little girl they used to bully. He had absolutely no idea he was dealing with an apex predator who had unlimited corporate capital at her disposal. I reached into my handbag, bypassing the frozen personal cards, and pulled out my heavy black corporate expense card. I turned right back around and walked straight into the luxury boutique. I was not going to beg. I was going to buy my suits, prepare for absolute war, and utterly destroy my brother-in-law. I walked into my downtown Chicago penthouse, dropping my shopping bags onto the imported marble floor. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a massive panoramic view of the city skyline, but I barely noticed the spectacular scenery. I walked straight to my kitchen island, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and set my phone down on the pristine quartz countertop. It had been ringing incessantly for the past 45 minutes. The caller identification displayed my mother's name flashing aggressively against the sleek black screen. I knew exactly what this phone call was going to be. It was the next phase of their coordinated attack. They had tried the legal ambush at the dinner table. They had executed the financial blockade at the bank. Now it was time for the emotional warfare. I unlocked my phone, swiped to my secure business applications, and opened a high-level encrypted audio recording program. In the state of Illinois, recording a phone call typically requires two-party consent, but there is a very specific legal exemption when the recording is actively capturing an extortion attempt. I pressed the bright red record button, tapped the speakerphone icon, and finally accepted the call. I did not say a single word. I simply stood there in the absolute quiet of my penthouse, letting the silence stretch across the cellular connection. "Jillian," my mother wailed, her voice instantly filling my kitchen with the sound of exaggerated theatrical sobbing. "Are you there? Please tell me you are there." I maintained my absolute silence, leaning my hands against the cool quartz countertop. I let her weep. I let her put on her desperate performance. The gaslighting playbook always starts with the abuser playing the ultimate victim. "You completely shattered this family last night," Patricia cried, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. Your father had to take his blood pressure medication twice because his heart was racing so badly. Caroline was up until 3 in the morning crying in her bedroom. You caused so much unnecessary damage and pain. Why do you always have to ruin everything with your dramatic outbursts? I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, feeling completely detached from her performance. The audacity to blame me for ruining a holiday dinner when they were actively conspiring to steal my multi-million-dollar company was staggering, but I needed her to keep talking. I needed her to dig her own grave on the digital record. We are just trying to help you, Jillian. My mother continued, her tone shifting smoothly from devastated victim to a concerned, deeply disappointed parent. Terrence is a highly respected financial expert. He knows how the economy works. He knows how hard it is for small, struggling businesses right now. He was only trying to step in and help you manage your finances before you completely destroyed your own life. He wanted to protect you from bankruptcy, but you threw his generosity right back in his face. She paused, waiting for me to defend myself. She expected me to argue, to shout back, to try and explain that my business was incredibly successful. She wanted me to engage in the chaotic emotional argument so she could twist my words. When I offered her absolutely nothing but dead silence, she was forced to fill the uncomfortable void herself. "We had to take drastic measures this morning, Jillian," she said, her voice hardening, dropping the fake tears entirely. "You left us no choice. Your father and I had to step in and freeze your accounts. We filed that report to protect you from making any more impulsive, irrational decisions. You clearly cannot handle your own money, and someone needed to put a stop to your reckless behavior." There it was, a clear, undisputed verbal admission of filing a false banking report. I watched the audio wavelength spiking on my phone screen, perfectly capturing her confession in crisp, high-definition digital sound. "You must be terrified right now," Patricia said, her voice dropping into a sickeningly sweet maternal coo. "You probably cannot even buy a cup of coffee today. But you do not have to sit alone in your apartment feeling scared and broke. We are your family. We love you. We just want what is best for you." The psychological manipulation was textbook. She was attempting to break my spirit by pretending my artificially induced poverty was actually a loving intervention. She wanted me to believe that my complete financial suffocation was an act of parental care. "All you have to do is come back to the house," Patricia instructed, laying out her ultimate ultimatum. "Just drive back to the suburbs. Come into your father's home office and sign those authorization documents for Terrence. Once you stop fighting us and sign the papers, Terrence will personally call his contacts at the bank. He will vouch for your character and tell the fraud department to lift the restriction on your debit cards. We can fix this entire mess by tonight." I stared at the recording app, feeling a cold, satisfying thrill wash over my entire body. My mother had just explicitly crossed the legal line from emotional manipulation straight into federal financial extortion. She had flat out offered to lift a fraudulent banking freeze in direct exchange for my signature on a corporate asset transfer. "You are 33 years old, Jillian," my mother scolded, her tone becoming sharp and condescending. "It is time to stop acting like a stubborn, rebellious child. You need to swallow your foolish pride and let the adults handle the business. We will expect you at the house by 5 o'clock. Do not make us take further action against you." I leaned closer to the microphone on my phone. My voice was completely steady, devoid of any fear or hesitation. "Let me make sure I understand you perfectly, Patricia," I said, using her first name to establish my absolute detachment. "You are explicitly stating that if I drive to your house and sign away the executive voting rights of my company to Terrence, you will instruct the bank to unfreeze my personal checking account. Is that your exact offer?" "Yes, Jillian," my mother snapped clearly, annoyed by my formal tone, but far too arrogant to realize she was being legally cornered. "That is exactly what I'm saying. Sign the trust documents and you get your little debit cards back. It is very simple." I reached out and tapped the red square on my screen, ending the recording, and securing the audio file directly into my encrypted corporate cloud server. "I am not coming to your house, Patricia," I stated, my voice dropping to a glacial, chilling whisper. "And you are going to need a lot more than Terrence to save you from what is coming next." I ended the call before she could utter a single word in response. I did not block her number. I wanted her to keep trying to reach me. I wanted to collect every single threatening voicemail and desperate text message they were foolish enough to send. The financial ambush they thought would break me had just handed me the exact piece of leverage I needed. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of extortion, but they had absolutely no idea that I held all the winning cards. I picked up my phone again and dialed my corporate lawyer. The emotional phase of this family war was officially over. It was time to unleash the legal artillery. I walked into the sleek glass and steel lobby of Harrison's law firm less than an hour later. My designer boots clicked sharply against the polished marble floor, echoing my absolute determination. The receptionist recognized me immediately and nodded, waving me straight through the heavy double doors leading to the executive suites. I did not bother with pleasantries or small talk. I walked directly into Harrison's corner office and dropped my phone onto his massive glass desk. Harrison looked up from a thick stack of legal briefs. He was a sharp-dressed man in his late 50s with silver hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I took a seat in the heavy leather chair opposite him and tapped the screen of my phone, bringing up the audio file I had just saved to my secure corporate cloud. "Listen to this." I instructed, my voice completely steady. "Tell me exactly what we can do with it." I played the recording of my mother's frantic gaslighting and her explicit offer to lift the fraudulent banking freeze in direct exchange for the transfer of my company. Harrison listened in absolute silence. His professional demeanor remained perfectly intact, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward into a cold, predatory smile. When the recording finished and my mother's demands faded into silence, Harrison leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Jillian." He began, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who destroys people in court for a living. "Your mother just handed us the literal smoking gun. What she described on that recording is textbook financial extortion and a blatant violation of federal banking laws. They attempted to use an elder abuse loophole to freeze your assets, but they completely failed to realize that using a false report to extort a corporate asset is a severe state and federal crime." I crossed my legs, leaning forward. "They think I am completely cut off, Harrison. They think my personal checking account is the only money I have. Terrence genuinely believes he has cornered me into absolute submission. He thinks I am sitting in my apartment crying over a declined credit card." Harrison let out a short, harsh laugh. "Terrence is an absolute fool who clearly does not understand basic corporate structuring. Let me assure you right now that your company is an impenetrable fortress. We set up your limited liability company with a massive legal firewall specifically designed to protect your operational capital from personal liabilities. Your corporate banking accounts are registered under a distinct employer identification number. They are completely insulated. Your multi-million-dollar business cash flow has not been touched and cannot be touched by your mother's pathetic joint account maneuver." The profound relief washing over me was immediate, but I did not let it soften my edge. I needed to strike back, and I needed to do it with overwhelming legal force. "How fast can we get my personal accounts unfrozen?" I asked. I refused to give them the satisfaction of thinking they won this round for even a single day. Harrison turned to his computer monitor, his fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. "With this audio recording proving the freeze was a malicious extortion attempt, we do not have to wait for the standard 72-hour investigation period. I am drafting an emergency injunction right now. We will file it directly with a federal judge this afternoon. The judge will issue a court order forcing the bank to lift the restriction on your personal accounts immediately. Furthermore, the bank will be legally notified that Patricia filed a fraudulent claim, which opens her up to severe civil penalties and potential criminal liabilities for banking fraud." I nodded, feeling the sheer power of the legal system aligning perfectly behind me. My mother thought she could discipline me like a disobedient teenager, but she was about to learn that playing games with federal banking regulations carries devastating real-world consequences. "But we are not stopping there," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Unfreezing my accounts is just playing defense. I want to go on the absolute offensive. I want Terrence to understand exactly who he messed with last night. I want to hit him so hard legally that his flashy fake investor facade completely shatters. Harrison looked at me, his eyes gleaming with intense professional approval. I am already 2 steps ahead of you, Jillian. We are not just defending your assets, we are actively prosecuting his attempted theft. I am currently drafting a massive civil lawsuit against Terrence for attempted corporate fraud, tortious interference, and extortion. Harrison pulled a thick printed document from his heavy-duty printer and slid it across the glass desk. He wants to play the role of the big-shot investment manager. Let us see how he handles a formal legal subpoena. We are demanding full discovery of his investment fund's operational history. We are legally demanding every single communication he had regarding your company. We are going to subpoena the shady notary he hired to trick you at the Thanksgiving table. We are going to drag his entire financial life into the glaring light of a federal courtroom and dissect every single lie he has ever told. I picked up the subpoena, feeling the heavy weight of the legal paper in my hands. The document was an absolute masterpiece of corporate warfare. It outlined every single dirty tactic Terrence had attempted. It legally bound him to preserve all electronic communications and financial records under threat of perjury. It was a complete and utter legal nightmare for a man who was desperately trying to hide his failing finances behind expensive suits and leased sports cars. "When can we serve him?" I asked, tracing my finger over the bold, legal headers. Harrison checked his heavy silver watch. "The process server is already waiting in our lobby. We will have him served at his fancy downtown office before 5 o'clock today." He is going to walk into his flashy investment firm expecting to celebrate his brilliant family heist, and instead he is going to be handed a stack of legal papers that will completely destroy his career. I stood up from the leather chair feeling taller and stronger than I had in my entire life. My family had spent 33 years calling me a massive disappointment. They had mocked my career, undermined my success, and attempted to rob me blind while smiling to my face. They thought they could push me into a dark corner and force me to surrender my life's work. "Send the process server," I instructed, looking Harrison directly in the eyes. "I want Terrence to feel the exact same panic he tried to inflict on me this morning. I want him to realize that he did not just fail to steal my company. He completely triggered his own absolute destruction." I walked out of Harrison's office, leaving the heavy paperwork in his capable hands. The legal counterattack was officially launched. My personal accounts would be fully restored within hours, and Terrence was about to receive the shock of his pathetic life. The war had rapidly moved from the petty family dining room to the ruthless, unforgiving arena of the American legal system, and I was holding an arsenal of undeniable, devastating evidence. I stepped into the private elevator, pressing the button for the lobby, my mind already calculating the next phase of their absolute ruin. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown corporate office, nursing a hot cup of black coffee, when my private business line began to ring. It was barely 8 in the morning on the Monday following the holiday weekend. The caller identification displayed the name Richard Kingsley, who was the chief medical officer for one of the largest hospital networks in the Midwest and my most lucrative ongoing client. I answered the phone with my usual professional greeting, fully expecting a routine discussion about our upcoming software integration schedule. Instead, Richard sounded incredibly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. "Jillian," he began, his voice tight with awkward hesitation, "I am calling you directly because I value our business relationship, but my wife just showed me something highly disturbing on her social media feed. She is part of several affluent suburban community groups up in the North Shore area. Your sister Caroline just posted a massive public statement about you." Richard paused, taking a heavy breath. "She is claiming that you are in the middle of a severe psychotic mental breakdown, and that you have actively embezzled your parents' entire retirement savings to keep your company afloat." I set my coffee mug down on my glass desk so hard the dark liquid splashed over the rim. The cold, calculated audacity of my family was absolutely limitless. They had failed to steal my company through legal trickery. They had failed to starve me out through a fraudulent banking freeze. Now they were launching a full-scale public smear campaign to utterly destroy my professional reputation. I thanked Richard for bringing this to my attention and assured him with absolute confidence that my company was completely financially solvent and that my sister was currently facing severe legal action for attempted extortion. I kept my voice perfectly calm and measured exactly the opposite of the mentally unstable woman Caroline was trying to portray to the world. Richard sounded audibly relieved by my steady professional tone and promised to disregard the online gossip before ending the call. The second the line disconnected, I opened my laptop and navigated straight to the social media platform. I did not even have to search hard. Caroline had made sure her post was set to public, and she had deliberately tagged the official business page of my health data analytics firm to ensure maximum visibility. There it was glaring back at me in high definition. A picture of my parents looking devastatingly sad and frail, sitting on their expensive country club sofa with Caroline and Terrence hovering behind them, looking like protective guardian angels. The caption was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation and suburban white tears. "It is with an absolutely broken heart that our family must ask for your prayers this morning," Caroline had written. "My younger sister Jillian is currently suffering from an untreated and severe manic psychological episode. For months, she has been hiding the fact that her computer business is completely bankrupt. Yesterday, we discovered the horrifying truth that Jillian has been secretly draining our elderly parents' life savings to hide her massive corporate debts. My incredible husband Terrence tried to stage a loving financial intervention over the holiday to save my parents from losing their home, but Jillian became violently unhinged. We are exploring medical committal options, but we want to warn the community about her erratic and dangerous behavior." My eyes scanned the screen, tracking the engagement metrics. The post already had hundreds of reactions, thousands of shares, and a comment section overflowing with absolute poison. Women from my mother's country club were leaving horrified messages, offering their prayers and condemning my actions. Local business owners in their suburban bubble were tagging each other, warning people to stay away from my company. Caroline was actively responding to the comments, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken older sister, just trying to hold her traumatized family together. She was spinning a completely fabricated narrative that reversed every single fact. She accused me of the exact crime that Terrence was actively committing against our parents. She painted me as the aggressive, bankrupt failure while crowning her fraud of a husband as the benevolent, wealthy savior. My phone began to vibrate violently on my desk. It was an incoming email from a major venture capital firm that had been silently vetting my company for a future expansion partnership. A minute later, a notification popped up from my lead software developer asking if the corporate payroll was going to bounce this week. The toxic digital fallout was spreading like a wildfire, threatening to burn down the corporate empire I had spent 5 years building. Terrence and Caroline knew exactly what they were doing. Terrence understood that his shiny investment manager facade was about to be shattered by my lawyer's subpoena. He knew I had the audio recording of my mother extorting me. He knew his financial crimes were about to be dragged into the brutal light of a federal courtroom. This social media ambush was his desperate preemptive strike. He was using Caroline's suburban mommy blogger influence to publicly brand me as a crazy, disgruntled, and financially ruined sister. He wanted to destroy my credibility so thoroughly that when I finally exposed his massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, the public and the authorities would simply dismiss me as a vengeful lunatic making up wild lies. I did not cry, I did not scream, I did not log into my account to type out a frantic emotional defense in the comment section. Arguing with an abuser on a public forum only gives them the chaotic attention they desperately crave. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the speed dial button for Harrison, my corporate attorney. Then I pressed the button to conference in Mitchell, who served as my director of public relations and crisis management. Both men answered almost simultaneously. "I assume you have both seen the garbage fire Caroline just ignited across the internet," I said, leaning back in my executive chair. Harrison let out a sharp, cynical laugh. I am taking high-resolution certified screenshots of every single pixel as we speak, Jillian. What your sister just published is the most beautifully documented case of textbook libel and digital defamation I have ever seen in my 30 years of practicing law. She put her malicious lies in writing, published them to a wide audience, and actively tagged your commercial enterprise to ensure maximum financial damage. Mitchell chimed in, his voice completely strictly business. My team is already tracing the shares and categorizing the professional fallout. We have drafted a totally neutral holding statement for our corporate clients, ensuring them that our financial audits are spotless and our operations are completely unhindered. We are not engaging with the suburban drama. We are communicating exclusively with the money. Good, I instructed, feeling a cold, calculating energy humming through my veins. Harrison, I do not want you to send them a cease and desist letter yet. There was a brief pause on the line before Harrison spoke, his tone laced with dark amusement. You want to let them keep digging the hole, do you not? Exactly, I replied, staring at the picture of Terrence acting like a wealthy savior on my screen. Let Caroline keep talking. Let her keep replying to those comments. Let her spread this fabricated story to every single country club wife and local business owner in the greater Chicago area. Every hour this post stays up, the quantifiable financial damages to my personal and corporate reputation increase exponentially. She thinks she is destroying my character, but she is actually handing me the legal right to sue her for millions of dollars in punitive damages. I ended the conference call with clear directives for my executive team. Caroline and Terrence thought this digital smear campaign was their ultimate trump card. They thought public shaming would finally break the ugly college dropout they had despised for decades. They had absolutely no idea that while they were busy playing petty high school gossip games on social media, I was about to deploy a financial nuclear bomb that would wipe their entire fake luxury lifestyle off the face of the earth. 72 hours after the Thanksgiving disaster, I was sitting in the heavily fortified glass conference room of Harrison's law firm. The chaotic noise of the Chicago morning traffic was completely silenced by the soundproof windows. I sat at the head of the long marble table, sipping a double espresso, while Harrison arranged a series of thick black binders in front of me. He was not alone this time. Sitting across from me were two men wearing sharp charcoal suits, with an intensely serious demeanor that immediately commanded respect. Jillian Harrison began, his voice dropping to a low, confidential volume. When we launched our legal counterattack, I realized that subpoenaing Terrence's business records through standard civil court procedures would take months. We needed to know exactly what kind of financial distress he was hiding right now. So I bypassed the standard discovery process and retained a private intelligence firm. These gentlemen are elite forensic accountants. They specialize in dismantling complex corporate fraud for high-net-worth clients. The older of the two accountants slid the heaviest black binder across the polished marble table. He introduced himself as a former investigator for the Department of Justice. He did not waste a single second with pleasantries. He opened the binder to a highly detailed financial flowchart connecting dozens of offshore accounts and shell companies. We pulled every available public filing tax record and heavily guarded credit report tied to your brother-in-law's investment fund, the accountant stated flatly. Terrence projects the image of a highly successful Wall Street-level wealth manager. He drives leased luxury cars. He holds expensive country club memberships. He regularly hosts lavish charity dinners to attract wealthy suburban clients, including many of your parents' affluent friends. I stared at the complex flowchart tracing the red lines connecting the various corporate entities. What is the actual valuation of his fund? I asked, keeping my tone strictly professional. The accountant looked me dead in the eyes. Zero. His fund is worth absolutely nothing, Jillian. In fact, it is currently operating at a catastrophic negative deficit. The air in the conference room grew heavy. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, processing the sheer magnitude of the statement. A negative deficit. How is he still operating an investment firm with no actual capital? Harrison let out a dark, cynical sigh. Because Terrence is not running an investment firm, Jillian. He is running a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The revelation hit me with the force of a freight train. A Ponzi scheme. The ultimate financial house of cards. I stared at the complex web of red lines on the paper, suddenly understanding exactly what I was looking at. Terrence had not made a single legitimate market trade or profitable stock investment in over 3 years. Instead, he had been aggressively recruiting new wealthy investors, promising them absurdly high guaranteed returns. He was taking the fresh cash from the new victims and using it to pay the fake dividends to his older clients, all while skimming millions off the top to fund his own extravagant luxury lifestyle. It is a textbook predatory operation, the accountant continued, tapping a specific column of numbers, and it is entirely collapsing as we speak. The current market downturn caused several of his largest original investors to request massive cash withdrawals last month. Terrence does not have the liquid capital to pay them out. He is completely tapped out. But that is not even the most dangerous part of this situation. The accountant slid a second, much thinner folder toward me. This folder was stamped with a highly classified warning label. 2 weeks ago, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission quietly opened a covert federal investigation into his primary fund. The accountant revealed, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. The SEC noticed the irregularities in his mandatory financial reporting. They are currently building a massive federal indictment. Terrence is not just broke. He is actively being hunted by the federal government. He is looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison for wire fraud, securities fraud, and severe money laundering. My blood ran completely cold. The puzzle pieces from the Thanksgiving dinner suddenly slammed together with terrifying, perfect clarity. The fake retirement document, the desperate sweating on Terrence's forehead, the frantic push to make me sign over the executive voting rights of my multi-million-dollar company. He did not want my company to use as collateral for a temporary bridge loan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper as the horrifying reality set in. He did not need a line of credit. Harrison nodded grimly, his expression hardening into absolute disgust. Exactly, Jillian. Terrence needed a pristine, heavily regulated, and highly profitable corporate entity to serve as a massive money laundering shell. Your health data analytics firm processes millions of dollars in complex medical network transactions and institutional grants every single day. The financial volume is enormous. I finished Harrison's thought, the terrifying truth making my hands shake slightly. He wanted to seize executive control of my company so he could quietly filter his stolen investor funds through my legitimate corporate billing system. He was going to wash his dirty Ponzi money through my clean medical contracts to pay off his angry clients and hide his tracks from the federal investigators. He was going to use your flawless corporate reputation as his ultimate human shield, Harrison confirmed. And when the SEC finally kicked the doors down and raided the operations, the paper trail would lead directly to your signature as the chief executive officer. Terrence would have claimed he was just an external advisor. He would have thrown you directly to the federal prosecutors. He was actively trying to frame you to take his place in federal prison. I sat frozen in the conference room, staring at the undeniable forensic proof of my family's ultimate betrayal. My parents had looked me in the eyes and ordered me to sign those papers. They had screamed at me, called me selfish, and demanded I hand over my life's work to a man who was actively planning to destroy my entire existence. They might not have known the complex details of the SEC investigation or the federal prison sentences, but they knew Terrence was conducting shady business. They knew he was drowning, and they happily offered me up as a human sacrifice just to protect their golden son-in-law and their fake suburban status. They were perfectly willing to let their youngest daughter lose her company, her wealth, and her freedom, just so Caroline could keep driving her leased Mercedes and hosting country club luncheons. The shock and horror rapidly mutated into something else entirely. It mutated into an unstoppable, calculating fury. They thought they were manipulating a naive little sister. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to a corporate predator. I closed the thick black binder and pushed it back across the marble table. I looked at the forensic accountants. and then at my brilliant corporate lawyer. Do not send him the civil subpoena. I instructed, my voice echoing with lethal, absolute certainty. A civil lawsuit for attempted fraud is a complete waste of our time. Terrence wants to play high-stakes financial games. We are going to give him exactly what he asked for. Harrison leaned forward, a ruthless smile spreading across his face. What exactly do you have in mind, Jillian? I stood up from the heavy leather chair, smoothing my tailored blazer. I want your team to compile every single piece of forensic evidence you just showed me, package the offshore account routes, the fake dividend payouts, and the exact timeline of his failed withdrawals. We are going to wrap his entire criminal enterprise in a neat little bow with undeniable mathematical proof. And then we are not going to civil court. We are going to hand-deliver this entire dossier directly to the lead investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. We are going to help the federal government bury him alive. The heavy reinforced steel door of my downtown Chicago penthouse shuddered under the sheer force of aggressive pounding. It was barely 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing the devastating forensic dossier Harrison had prepared for the federal authorities, when the violent banging echoed through the quiet space. My building possessed state-of-the-art security protocols, but a wealthy-looking white family in designer coats throwing a hysterical tantrum can unfortunately bully their way past a new lobby concierge. I did not walk to the door. I simply picked up my tablet and switched the screen to the high-definition exterior security cameras I had installed last year. The 4K resolution perfectly captured the absolute madness unfolding in my private corridor. My father, William, was red in the face, his fist raised to strike the thick wood again. My mother, Patricia, paced behind him, her expensive fur coat hastily thrown over her shoulders, her usual pristine country club composure entirely shattered. And there was Caroline. My perfect older sister looked completely unhinged. Her blonde hair was a frantic mess, and she was clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. "Open this door right now, Jillian!" My father roared, his voice muffled but entirely audible through the heavy security door. "We know you are in there. You are going to listen to us, and you are going to fix the massive mess you just made." I remained perfectly still, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. I pressed the record button on the security interface, capturing both the crystal-clear video and the enhanced audio of their meltdown. "Terrence's lawyers just called us," Caroline shrieked, pushing past our father to pound her own fists against the door. She was sobbing aggressively, but the tears were born from sheer panic, not sorrow. "You filed a federal injunction against him. You froze his operations. You are ruining my marriage and my life. Open the door and drop the ridiculous lawsuit before you destroy everything we have built." When I offered absolutely zero response, my father stepped forward again, shoving Caroline aside. The desperate narcissism in his eyes was caught perfectly on the camera lens. He leaned directly into the intercom speaker, glaring into the tiny camera lens, as if he could see my face on the other side. "Listen to me, you ungrateful brat," Williams spat, his voice dropping into a vicious, threatening register. "If you do not call your corporate attack dog of a lawyer and drop every single legal action against Terrence by tomorrow morning, I will personally ensure you lose every single client you have ever secured." He was panting heavily, his breath fogging up the camera lens. "I know exactly who you do business with, Jillian. I will drive to the American Medical Association myself. I will walk into the executive offices of every major hospital network in the Midwest. I will personally sit down with the board of directors and tell them my youngest daughter is suffering from severe paranoid schizophrenia. I will tell them, you are a pathological liar who steals from her own family. I will completely nuke your professional reputation until your little health data company is entirely bankrupt and nobody in the medical industry will even look at your software." My mother, Patricia, stepped up next to him, using her signature tactic of twisting pure malice into toxic maternal concern. "Please, Jillian," she cried, pressing her hands against the steel door. "Your father is serious. We do not want to destroy your career, but you are leaving us absolutely no choice. You are forcing our hand by attacking Terrence. Just drop the legal injunction." Let Terrence handle the financial bridge loan and we can go back to being a happy family. Do not make your father ruin your life. We are just trying to save you from yourself. The sheer, unadulterated madness of their logic was breathtaking. My father was explicitly threatening to commit corporate defamation and medical libel to blackmail me into dropping a legitimate federal fraud case. My mother was actively framing his criminal extortion as an act of loving parental discipline. They genuinely believed that because they brought me into this world, they possessed the absolute supreme authority to destroy me if I refused to submit to their demands. For 33 years, that specific tone of voice from my father would have sent me into a blind panic. During my college years, he would use that exact same threatening voice to promise he would cut off my tuition if I did not major in what he wanted. The old Gillian would have opened the door, tears streaming down her face, begging for their forgiveness, terrified of losing the career she worked so hard to build. The old Gillian would have sacrificed her own soul just to keep the peace. But the woman sitting on the velvet bar stool watching them on a digital screen felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. I did not move a single muscle toward the door. I did not speak through the intercom to defend myself. Engaging with an abusive narcissist only feeds their chaotic energy. Silence is the only weapon they truly fear because it strips them of all their power. I watched Caroline kick the base of the door in a childish fit of rage, screaming that I was a jealous, ugly monster who could never find a real, successful man like Terrence. I watched my father pace the hallway shouting increasingly unhinged threats about burning my business to the ground. I watched my mother weep fake tears for the security camera performing her tragic victim routine for an audience of one. They thought they were intimidating me. They thought their aggressive physical presence and their vile professional threats would intimidate me into calling Harrison to drop the case. What they did not realize was that they were actively committing felony extortion on a high-definition digital recording. Every single threat my father made about contacting my medical clients was a direct violation of witness intimidation laws. I tapped the screen, saving the 15-minute video file to 2 separate secure cloud servers. I picked up my phone and sent a brief text message to Harrison, attaching the initial video clip. My family is currently outside my door, actively threatening to commit corporate libel and professional defamation if we do not drop the injunction against Terrence. I typed, my fingers flying rapidly across the screen. They are providing the exact leverage we need to establish a pattern of coordinated criminal conspiracy. Add felony extortion and witness intimidation to the federal dossier immediately. Harrison replied less than 30 seconds later. The message contained a single checkmark emoji, followed by a brief sentence. I am drafting the restraining orders and adding the extortion charges right now. Let them scream, Jillian. They are only securing their own federal prison sentences. I set my phone face down on the marble counter and picked up my glass of sparkling water. The pounding on the door eventually slowed down as their physical energy completely drained away. Their shouts turned into muffled, desperate arguments among themselves as they realized their intimidation tactics were entirely useless. I sat in the absolute safety of my fortress, smiling quietly at the security monitor. They had walked right into the trap and enthusiastically handed me the final nail for their collective coffin. I sat in my corner office overlooking the Chicago River, completely ignoring the frantic social media notifications constantly lighting up my personal phone screen. Caroline was still furiously typing long, dramatic posts in her suburban community groups claiming I was a mentally unstable thief who ruined the holiday. My mother was sharing those posts, adding her own tearful commentary about how much she sacrificed for an ungrateful child. I refused to type a single word in my own defense. I refused to hire a public relations firm to release a counterstatement. Arguing on the internet is a desperate tactic for people who have absolutely no real power in the real world. I am the chief executive officer of a highly profitable enterprise, and I handle my problems with cold, calculated financial strategy, not emotional public outbursts. I buzzed my executive assistant and instructed him to hold all my incoming calls for the next 2 hours. I picked up my encrypted tablet and walked directly into the private executive conference room where Harrison was already waiting with his lead forensic accountant. Harrison had a thick stack of complex financial documents spread across the polished glass table. He was drinking black coffee and looking incredibly satisfied. I took my seat at the head of the table, smoothing my tailored skirt. "We are not just going to defend against Terrence's fraudulent claims," I stated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any hesitation. "I do not just want him to face a federal indictment from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I want to completely own him first. I want to legally back him into a financial corner so tight he cannot even breathe without my explicit permission." Harrison smiled, that cold, sharp, predatory smile that made him the most feared corporate litigator in Illinois. He pushed a crisp blue folder across the glass table toward me. "I have already anticipated your strategy, Jillian. I spent the weekend drafting the incorporation papers for a highly insulated blind trust and a corporate shell entity registered in Delaware. We are calling the entity Zenith Financial Acquisitions. It is shielded by 3 layers of corporate privacy laws, making it completely untraceable to you personally or to your health data analytics firm." I opened the blue folder, carefully reviewing the aggressive debt acquisition strategy Harrison had mapped out. The plan was an absolute masterpiece of corporate warfare. Terrence had funded his flashy luxury lifestyle and his rapidly failing investment fund by issuing high-yield promissory notes to wealthy suburban investors. He had promised his country club clients completely unrealistic, guaranteed double-digit returns to keep the cash flowing. Now that his massive Ponzi scheme was actively collapsing and his liquidity was completely dried up, those investors were absolutely panicking. They were holding pieces of legal paper that were essentially worthless, and they were starting to realize they had been robbed blind. Our forensic accounting team had spent the last 48 hours identifying his most desperate and furious creditors. These were people who needed cash immediately and were incredibly willing to sell Terrence's debt at a massive discount just to cut their losses and escape the sinking ship before the federal government raided his offices. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pulled up my secure banking application on my tablet and authorized the immediate transfer of $4 million from my corporate reserve accounts directly into the Zenith Financial Acquisitions shell company. I looked at Harrison and gave him the ultimate green light. "Go hunting," I instructed him. "Buy every single note you can find." Note. Over the next 7 days, Harrison's legal team worked relentlessly. They operated like financial assassins, acting strictly in the shadows. They quietly approached Terrence's furious investors one by one, offering them an immediate cash buyout for their distressed promissory notes. The pitch was simple and incredibly effective. Zenith Financial Acquisitions was willing to pay them 40 cents on the dollar right now in clean, untraceable cash. The alternative was waiting years for a federal bankruptcy court to award them pennies. The desperate creditors eagerly signed the transfer agreements, taking the guaranteed cash and legally signing over the full weight of the debt to the shell company. They had absolutely no idea that the mysterious corporate buyer bailing them out was actually Terrence's younger sister-in-law. They did not care who was buying the bad paper as long as they got their money back. Day after day, Harrison's team scooped up the debt, absorbing the financial obligations that Terrence had recklessly promised to his inner circle. While Caroline was busy posting photos of her manicured hands holding a coffee cup, complaining about her stressful family situation, I was sitting in my skyscraper actively buying the financial chains that bound her husband. My parents were calling my voicemail, threatening to ruin my reputation while I was signing the final transfer deeds that gave me absolute total ownership of their precious son-in-law's entire financial future. The contrast between their petty suburban gossip and my multi-million-dollar corporate takeover was almost poetic. By the end of the week, Harrison walked back into my office and handed me a heavy leather-bound portfolio. He did not say a word. He simply placed it on my desk and nodded. I opened the portfolio and looked at the final tally carefully tabulated by the forensic accountants. I had successfully purchased over 85% of Terrence's outstanding private debt. I owned the promissory notes he had issued to his golf buddies. I owned the contracts he had signed with his wealthy neighbors. I owned the aggressive high-interest loans he had taken out to lease his luxury sports cars. I closed the leather portfolio, feeling a surge of absolute untouchable power coursing through my veins. Caroline and my parents thought they were destroying my reputation by calling me a psychological wreck on the internet. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had absolutely no idea that I had just spent the last 7 days legally buying the very ground they walked on. I was no longer just the discarded scapegoat of this toxic family. I was officially Terrence's largest creditor. I owned his debt. I owned his business obligations. I legally owned him. And I was going to collect every single penny with ruthless, absolute precision. The rain was lashing aggressively against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office when my private line rang. It was late on a Wednesday evening, and the downtown Chicago financial district was mostly dark. The caller identification displayed an unknown number, but my instincts told me to answer it. "Is this Jillian?" a woman's voice asked, trembling slightly over the encrypted connection. "My name is Monica. I was the senior executive assistant at your brother-in-law's investment firm until he abruptly fired me 2 weeks ago. He threatened to destroy my entire career if I ever spoke to anyone about what I saw. But I saw the horrific lies your sister posted about you on social media today. I know exactly what they are trying to do to you, and I have the absolute proof of why they are doing it." I immediately instructed my lobby security to clear Monica for entry and send her directly up to my secure executive floor. 10 minutes later, a terrified-looking woman in her late 20s stepped out of the private elevator, clutching a thick manila folder against her chest like a physical shield. I offered her a glass of water and guided her into the soundproof conference room, ensuring she felt completely safe. Monica did not waste any time. She slid the heavy manila envelope across the glass table. "Terrence did not fire me because of my job performance," she explained, her voice gaining a steady rhythm of anger. "He fired me because I was responsible for logging the incoming wire transfers for his elite clients, and I noticed a massive discrepancy. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I accidentally accessed his private email server while trying to sync his calendar. I saw exactly who his biggest and most desperate investors actually were." I opened the folder. Inside was a stack of printed email chains and highly classified bank wire confirmations. I recognized my father's personal email address immediately. I began reading the top printed thread and felt the last remaining shreds of my familial illusion shatter into a million jagged pieces. My parents were not just naive victims who blindly trusted their flashy son-in-law. They were not just standing by Terrence out of blind family loyalty. They were his willing, greedy co-conspirators. According to the extensive email chain dating back 8 months, my parents had secretly taken out a massive secondary mortgage on their pristine suburban mansion. They had drained every single penny of equity out of the house they loved so much. Why did they do it? Because Terrence had privately promised them a completely absurd 30% guaranteed return on their investment if they funneled their money directly into his new aggressive tier fund. My parents were blinded by sheer, unprecedented greed. They wanted to use the massive fake profits to buy an expansive summer home in the Hamptons just to show off to their wealthy country club friends and elevate their fake high society status. They handed Terrence their entire financial safety net purely out of vanity. And Terrence, being the absolute fraud that he was, immediately lost every single dollar to pay off his older, angry investors. I turned to the next page in the folder. It was a scanned copy of a legal notice from a major national bank. It was a formal pre-foreclosure warning addressed directly to my parents. The bank was threatening to seize their beloved suburban mansion because they had defaulted on the massive secondary mortgage payments for 3 consecutive months. The timeline of the betrayal aligned with terrifying perfect clarity. The bank sent my parents the foreclosure notice exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving. My parents completely panicked, realizing they were about to lose their house, their country club status, and their entire wealthy reputation. They cornered Terrence, demanding their money back. Terrence obviously did not have a single dime to give them, so he pitched them a new, brilliantly evil solution. I read the final printed email sent from Terrence directly to my father just 3 days before the holiday dinner. William, do not panic about the bank, Terrence had written. I have a foolproof strategy to secure the capital we need to save your house and keep Caroline completely in the dark about our losses. Jillian runs a highly liquid health data company with a flawless credit rating. We invite her to dinner, play on her emotions, and get her to sign a durable power of attorney under the guise of your retirement trust. Once I have executive control of her company, I will immediately liquidate her corporate assets and use her multi-million-dollar cash reserves to pay off your mortgage. We save the house and Jillian takes the financial hit. She is young and can start over. My father, William, had replied to that email exactly 2 minutes later. His response consisted of a single, devastating sentence. Set up the paperwork for Thursday night, and we will make sure she signs it. I placed the paper back down on the glass table. The cold, calculated evil of their plan was absolutely staggering. My own parents actively conspired to completely bankrupt my company and destroy my entire life just to save their own house from foreclosure. They were perfectly willing to throw their youngest daughter under a financial bus to cover up their own greedy mistakes and protect their precious public image. They did not just enable Terrence, they actively plotted with him to orchestrate my total destruction. I looked up at Monica, who was watching me with an expression of deep sympathy. You have no idea how valuable this is, I told her, keeping my voice perfectly level, despite the raging inferno of betrayal burning in my chest. Terrence thought he could silence you by firing you, but he just handed me the exact key to his prison cell. I pulled out my corporate checkbook and wrote a substantial amount to cover her living expenses for the next 6 months. I slid it across the table along with my platinum business card. Take a long vacation, Monica, I instructed her. And when you return, call my human resources director. You have a guaranteed 6-figure position in my administrative wing waiting for you. You will never have to worry about a predatory boss ever again. She thanked me profusely, tears of relief welling in her eyes, before she took the private elevator back down to the lobby. I stood alone in the quiet conference room, holding the printed emails that completely condemned my parents to ruin. They had gone on social media and cried to the entire world that I was trying to steal their retirement funds. In reality, they were the ones actively plotting to steal my company to save their foreclosed mansion. They thought they could outsmart me. They thought they could sacrifice me to save themselves. I picked up my phone and dialed Harrison. It was past midnight, but he answered immediately. Harrison, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I have the smoking gun. We know exactly why my parents tried to force my hand at Thanksgiving. They are facing imminent foreclosure and conspired with Terrence to liquidate my company to pay off their massive hidden debts. I could hear Harrison sit up straight on the other end of the line. That changes the entire legal landscape, Jillian. They are not just accessories after the fact. They are primary co-conspirators in a federal extortion and fraud scheme. Exactly, I replied, stepping over to the massive glass window, looking down at the dark city streets below. Terrence and Caroline have been boasting that they are coming to my corporate headquarters tomorrow to demand I drop the injunction. Let them come. Let my parents walk right into my building thinking they have the upper hand. The trap is completely set, and tomorrow morning I am going to slam the steel cage shut on all of them. At exactly 9 on Thursday morning, the internal phone on my massive glass desk lit up. My head of corporate security, a highly trained former military contractor named Carter, informed me that 4 extremely agitated individuals were causing a scene in the main lobby of our skyscraper. They were loudly demanding to see me, claiming it was an urgent family emergency. I instructed Carter to issue them temporary visitor badges and escort them directly up to the executive floor. I wanted them to experience the full psychological impact of their surroundings. I pulled up the live security feed on my tablet and watched their arrival. My parents, William and Patricia, marched through the revolving glass doors of the towering Class A office building, located in the absolute epicenter of the Chicago financial district. Caroline followed closely behind them, wearing oversized sunglasses and clutching her designer purse. Terence brought up the rear, walking with a stiff, arrogant swagger that poorly masked his underlying panic. They had driven downtown with the sole intention of bullying me into absolute submission. Based on their previous insults, they genuinely expected to find my business operating out of a dark, dingy basement or a cheap shared co-working space. They planned to kick the door open, belittle my working conditions, and scream at me until I agreed to drop the federal injunction. They were completely unprepared for the sheer, monumental scale of reality. On the security monitor, I watched my father approach the imposing marble front desk. He barked my name at the uniformed concierge, demanding to be pointed toward whatever tiny back office I was renting. The concierge calmly checked the digital directory and directed them to the dedicated express elevators reserved exclusively for corporate headquarters. I saw the first flicker of genuine confusion cross my father's face when he realized my company occupied not just one, but the top two entire floors of the premium high-rise. Terence tried to maintain his loud facade. I could see his mouth moving on the silent video feed, likely assuring my parents that I was just leasing a single cubicle on a shared floor. He adjusted his expensive tie, trying to project dominance as they stepped into the high-speed elevator. I switched the camera feed to the 45th floor reception area and waited. The heavy steel elevator doors slid open, revealing the absolute opposite of a struggling startup. The entire floor was a masterpiece of modern corporate architecture. Sleek glass walls separated high-tech conference rooms. Massive digital screens displayed real-time health data analytics and global market algorithms. Over 60 employees dressed in sharp, tailored business attire moved efficiently through the expansive open-concept workspace. The atmosphere was humming with intense, high-level corporate productivity. Behind the polished quartz reception desk, the wall featured my company logo forged in brushed steel, illuminated by soft ambient lighting. My family stepped out of the elevator and physically froze in their tracks. The security camera perfectly captured the exact moment their entire false reality completely shattered. My father, William, dropped his jaw, staring up at the massive steel logo. He looked around the sprawling, multi-million-dollar facility like a man who had just landed on an alien planet. His eyes darted from the expensive modern art on the walls to the dozens of busy professionals who were currently managing national healthcare contracts. My mother, Patricia, actually stumbled backward, bumping into Caroline. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth in absolute shock. For 33 years, she had confidently told all her wealthy suburban friends that I was a massive disappointment playing with silly computers. Now she was standing in the middle of a corporate empire that made her beloved country club look like a cheap roadside diner. But the most satisfying reaction belonged entirely to Terence. The fake investment manager looked like he was going to vomit right there on the pristine imported carpet. His eyes widened in sheer unfiltered terror as his brain finally processed the astronomical financial value of the company he had actively tried to steal. He suddenly realized he had not just tried to trick a naive little sister. He had attempted to commit massive corporate fraud against a multi-million-dollar institutional powerhouse. The crushing realization that he had brought a butter knife to a nuclear war was written all over his sweating face. Caroline grabbed Terence's arm frantically, whispering to him. She was looking around the massive office space, her eyes wide with a toxic mixture of greed and disbelief. She pointed toward a glass corner office where a team of software engineers was conducting a high-stakes video conference. She simply could not compute that the younger sister she had relentlessly bullied was the supreme commander of this entire operation. Carter, my head of security, approached them with a cold, professional demeanor. He did not offer any warm greetings. He simply instructed them to follow him. He led them through the main corporate bullpen, forcing them to walk the long, humiliating path past dozens of my highly paid employees. My staff barely glanced at them, returning immediately to their complex data models and ringing phones. To my employees, my family was nothing but a group of irrelevant visitors. I stood up from my desk and walked into the executive glass conference room adjoining my private office. I took my seat at the head of the massive obsidian table, arranging the explosive financial dossiers in front of me. I smoothed my tailored designer blazer and waited. The heavy glass door swung open. Carter stood aside, allowing my parents Caroline and Terrence to stumble into the room. They looked completely disoriented, stripped of all their suburban arrogance. The towering floor-to-ceiling windows behind me offered a commanding view of the sprawling Chicago skyline, framing me against the powerful backdrop of the city. I did not stand up to greet them. I did not offer them a seat or a glass of water. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, folding my hands deliberately on top of the forensic accounting files. "Welcome to my silly little computer business," I said, my voice slicing through the thick, heavy silence like a razor-sharp blade. "I understand you wanted to discuss my finances." The trap they thought they were setting for me had completely vanished. They had marched aggressively into my territory, expecting an easy kill. Instead, they had walked directly into the jaws of a corporate leviathan, and the heavy steel cage was finally locking shut around them. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind them, sealing the four of them inside the soundproof executive conference room. My employees outside could see absolutely everything through the transparent walls, but could hear nothing. It was the perfect stage for a corporate execution. Terrence was the first to attempt to break the suffocating tension. He pulled out one of the ergonomic leather chairs and sat down, forcing a smile that looked more like a painful grimace. He adjusted his expensive tie again, desperate to regain his footing in a room where he was clearly hopelessly outmatched. "Jillian, we really got off on the wrong foot over the holiday," Terrence began, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the obsidian table, attempting to project a calm, collaborative demeanor. "Thanksgiving is a high-stress time for everyone." Tensions were running hot, and things were said that nobody actually meant. "We came down here today because we want to clear the air. We are family, and family forgives each other. You filed a severe legal injunction against me, and it is causing some unnecessary friction for my daily operations. We just need you to call your lawyers and withdraw the filing so we can all move past this unfortunate misunderstanding." My father William immediately nodded in eager agreement, taking the chair next to Terrence. "Exactly, Jillian. We can all be reasonable adults about this. You have clearly done very well for yourself here. You do not need to hold a grudge. We can put this ugly legal business behind us today." I sat perfectly still, letting their pathetic, desperate pleas hang in the cold air. They were sitting in my multi-million-dollar headquarters, completely surrounded by my success, and they still had the absolute audacity to speak to me like a petulant child who needed to be managed. Terrence honestly believed he could smooth-talk his way out of an attempted corporate heist with a few fake apologies and a cheap appeal to family loyalty. I let out a low, sharp laugh that made Caroline flinch in her seat. "A misunderstanding, Terrence," I repeated, keeping my tone deadly and precise. "You attempted to trick me into signing away the voting rights of my entire company so you could use my legitimate corporate infrastructure to launder money and hide your collapsing Ponzi scheme from the federal government. There is absolutely nothing to misunderstand. You are a criminal and a fraud." Terrence's face flushed a deep, angry red. He slammed his hand flat against the table, dropping the friendly brother-in-law routine entirely. "Now you listen to me, Jillian," he hissed, dropping his voice to a threatening register. "You might have a nice office, but you have absolutely no idea how high finance works. You are meddling in things way above your pay grade. If you do not drop that injunction today, I will tie you up in civil litigation for the next decade. I have a team of corporate lawyers who will bury this little operation of yours in endless discovery motions." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached across the polished obsidian table and picked up the heavy blue portfolio that Harrison had finalized for me. I tossed it effortlessly across the slick surface. It slid perfectly, coming to a halt directly in front of Terrence. "Go ahead," I instructed, leaning back in my executive chair. Open it. Terrence glared at me, highly suspicious, but his arrogance drove him to flip open the heavy cover. He stared down at the crisp legal documents printed on thick, watermarked paper. I watched his eyes scan the first page. I watched his pupils dilate in sheer absolute horror. Let me educate you on how high finance actually works, Terrence, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls with lethal clarity. Over the past 7 days, a private Delaware shell corporation named Zenith Financial Acquisitions has been actively approaching your most furious and desperate investors. The same country club investors you promised guaranteed double-digit returns. The same investors who have been demanding cash withdrawals that you cannot fulfill. Zenith Financial Acquisitions offered to buy out their distressed promissory notes for 40 cents on the dollar in clean, untraceable cash. Terrence's hands began to shake violently. He tried to flip to the next page, but his fingers were trembling so badly he fumbled the paper. They eagerly signed the transfer agreements, Terrence. I continued twisting the knife with absolute precision. Zenith Financial Acquisitions now legally owns over 85% of your outstanding private debt. You owe Zenith slightly over $4 million. The legal transfer is completely finalized and filed. Caroline leaned over her husband's shoulder, trying to read the complex financial documents. What does this mean? She demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. Terrence, what is she talking about? Terrence could not answer her. He was completely paralyzed, staring at the exact dollar amount printed in bold black ink at the bottom of the ledger. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death warrant. It means, Caroline, I stated, locking eyes with my older sister, that your husband does not owe money to his golf buddies anymore. He owes money to Zenith Financial Acquisitions, and I am the sole registered director and exclusive shareholder of Zenith Financial Acquisitions. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. My father stopped breathing. My mother stared at me, her eyes wide with total incomprehension. I am not your naive little sister-in-law, Terrence, I whispered, leaning forward, pressing my hands flat against the cold obsidian table. I am your biggest creditor. I own your debt. I own your contracts. I own every single financial obligation you have recklessly accumulated. Terrence opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled, pathetic sound escaped his throat. The slick, wealthy investment manager persona was completely annihilated. He was nothing but a terrified, broke fraud staring directly into the eyes of the woman who held his entire existence in the palm of her hand. From this exact moment forward, I have the unilateral legal right to petition the federal bankruptcy court to force your entire operation into involuntary liquidation, I declared. I can freeze every single remaining asset you possess. I can seize your luxury leased vehicles. I can garnish any future wages you ever earn. You tried to steal my company to save yourself, but you just handed me the legal authority to destroy you completely. Terrence's arrogant face completely collapsed. The color drained from his skin, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. His broad shoulders slumped, and he sank back into his chair, totally defeated, crushed by the sheer, overwhelming weight of my financial counterstrike. He had marched into my building, expecting to intimidate a victim. Instead, he had walked directly into a heavily fortified corporate slaughterhouse, and I had just locked the doors. The heavy silence in the room was abruptly broken by the sound of Caroline hyperventilating. She was clutching her designer handbag against her chest, staring at her husband, who looked like an empty hollow shell. But my primary focus was no longer on the defeated fraud sitting at the table. I slowly turned my gaze away from Terrence and locked eyes directly with my parents. William and Patricia were sitting perfectly rigid, their postures stiff with a toxic mixture of fear and lingering arrogance. They still believed they possessed some supreme parental authority over me. They still thought they could scold me into submission. I reached into the leather portfolio and withdrew the thick manila envelope I had received from Terrence's former executive assistant. I did not toss it carelessly like I did with the debt portfolio. I placed it deliberately in the exact center of the table, right between my mother and my father. Did you honestly believe I only ordered a forensic audit on your precious son-in-law? I asked, my voice echoing with a chilling, calculated calm. Did you actually think I would dismantle his entire financial operation without finding out exactly why he was so incredibly desperate to steal my company on Thanksgiving night? My father stared at the manila envelope as if it were a live explosive device. His hands remained tightly folded in his lap, refusing to touch the paper. Go ahead, William, I instructed, using his first name to entirely strip away his patriarchal authority. Read the email chain printed on the very top page. Read the message Terrence sent you exactly 3 days before you invited me to your house for a fake reconciliation dinner. When he refused to move, I reached out and flipped the folder open for him. I read the words aloud, letting the undeniable proof of their betrayal hang heavily in the air. William, do not panic about the bank. I have a foolproof strategy to secure the capital we need to save your house. We invite Jillian to dinner and get her to sign a durable power of attorney. Once I have executive control of her company, I will immediately liquidate her corporate assets and use her multi-million-dollar cash reserves to pay off your mortgage. I looked up from the paper, meeting my father's terrified gaze. And your response, William, was a single sentence. You told him to set up the paperwork and you would make sure I signed it. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a fragile, broken old man. He opened his mouth to formulate some kind of pathetic excuse, but no words came out. He knew he was caught. He knew I had the absolute proof that he had actively conspired to bankrupt his own daughter just to save his suburban mansion from a bank foreclosure. But my mother, Patricia, operated on an entirely different level of narcissistic delusion. She did not feel an ounce of shame. She did not feel a single drop of remorse for trying to destroy my life. Instead, she looked around my sprawling, multi-million-dollar corporate headquarters, and her eyes filled with a raging, greedy fury. She slammed her hands down on the obsidian table and stood up her chair, scraping violently against the floor. So what if we did? Patricia shrieked, her voice piercing through the heavy tension of the room. So what if we needed the money, Jillian? Look around you. Look at this massive skyscraper. Look at all these employees and these expensive glass walls. You are sitting on millions of dollars. You are disgustingly rich, and you are going to let your own parents lose their home. You are going to let us be thrown out into the street while you sat up here in your ivory tower. I stared at her, completely repulsed by the sheer magnitude of her entitlement. You took out a secret secondary mortgage to funnel cash into a Ponzi scheme because you were greedy, I stated coldly. You gambled your house to fund a fake luxury lifestyle. That is not my problem. It is your problem, Patricia screamed, stepping toward me, her face contorted with absolute unhinged rage. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. If we are losing our house, you have an absolute moral obligation to save us. You have the cash right now. You must take your company money and pay off Terrence's debt. You must fix his fund so he can pay our mortgage. You have to save my house. The absolute shamelessness of her demand was breathtaking. She was openly demanding that I commit corporate embezzlement to bail out the man who just tried to steal my identity, all so she could keep hosting country club luncheons in the suburbs. She was completely immune to reality. I am not giving you a single dime, Patricia, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You are going to lose your house. You are going to lose your country club membership. You are going to pack your designer clothes in garbage bags, and you are going to get evicted. The word evicted completely shattered whatever tiny fragment of sanity my mother had left. She let out a guttural, animalistic scream of pure fury. She lunged across the space between us, raising her hand high in the air, her face twisted in absolute vicious hatred. She fully intended to slap me across the face right in the middle of my own executive boardroom. But she never made contact. My head of security, Carter, had been standing by the heavy glass door monitoring the escalating situation, before my mother's hand could even come close to my face. Carter stepped forward with lightning speed. He caught her wrist mid-air, his massive hand locking around her arm like a steel vice. "Let me go!" Patricia shrieked, struggling frantically against his grip. "Let me teach this ungrateful, vicious brat a lesson. She owes us. She owes this family everything." Her shrieks were so loud, so completely devoid of any basic human dignity, that the sound pierced straight through the thick, soundproof glass of the conference room. I looked past her struggling form and saw dozens of my highly professional corporate employees standing frozen in the bullpen. They were all staring through the glass walls, watching a wealthy suburban woman having a violent, unhinged meltdown because she could not steal from her own daughter. My staff looked absolutely horrified. The sheer disgust on their faces was palpable. They respected me as a brilliant chief executive officer, and they were currently watching my biological mother behave like a rabid, entitled monster. Caroline buried her face in her hands, crying hysterically as the intense public humiliation finally broke her. Terence remained slumped in his chair, completely catatonic. My father, William, was staring at the floor, unable to meet the disgusted eyes of my employees outside the glass. Carter held my mother's wrist, firmly looking at me for a direct order. The dramatic family reunion had reached its ultimate pathetic climax, and there was absolutely nothing left to discuss. Carter maintained his iron grip on my mother's wrist, but Patricia was absolutely frantic. She twisted and thrashed, her expensive fur coat slipping off her shoulders and pooling on the pristine imported carpet. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure venom. She raised her free hand, swinging wildly toward my face, in a desperate final attempt to inflict physical pain where her emotional manipulation had completely failed. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I reached out with my own hand and caught her wrist mid-air, stopping her strike mere inches from my cheek. My grip was unyielding, fueled by 33 years of suppressed rage and my newfound absolute authority. I held her arm suspended in the air, forcing her to look at me. I forced her hand down, pushing it away with a sharp, definitive motion. Carter immediately stepped in closer to restrain her again, but I held up a single finger to halt him. I wanted to deliver this final message personally, and I wanted them to hear every single syllable. I looked directly into my mother's wide, panicked eyes. All the fake maternal warmth she had weaponized for decades was gone, leaving nothing but a hollow, greedy shell. "That house is the exact price you have to pay for your disgusting greed and your blatant lifelong favoritism, Patricia," I stated, my voice ringing with lethal finality. "You secretly mortgaged your entire sanctuary to fund a flashy fraud because you wanted to show off to your country club friends. You lost everything on a terrible bet. You do not get to storm into my corporate headquarters, throw a violent tantrum, and demand that I write a multi-million-dollar check to bail you out of your own profound stupidity." She gasped, her mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. I turned my attention to my father. William had completely shrunk into himself. He looked at the floor, absolutely broken by the realization that his golden son-in-law had bankrupted him and his discarded daughter held the executioner's axe. "And you, William," I continued, my tone devoid of any lingering affection. "You enabled this entirely. You looked at the multi-million-dollar company I built from nothing, and you saw it only as a sacrificial lamb for Terence. You were perfectly willing to let me go to federal prison just so you could keep your manicured lawn and your fake suburban prestige. You are not a father. You are a pathetic financial parasite." Caroline was still weeping openly, her perfectly styled hair clinging to her wet cheeks. She reached out toward me, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "Jillian, please. We are your family. We are blood. How can you just abandon us like this?" I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that echoed sharply against the glass walls. "I am not abandoning you, Caroline. I am simply holding a mirror up to your actions and letting you choke on the reflection. You spent your entire life treating me like garbage. You actively plotted to steal my trust fund on a recorded phone call. You went on social media to brand me a psychotic thief. You do not get to play the loving sister card now, just because your husband is a criminal, and you are about to lose your leased Mercedes." I turned away from their pathetic, defeated faces. I had absolutely nothing left to say to these strangers. The emotional umbilical cord that had tied me to their toxic approval was officially and permanently severed. I looked at Carter and gave him a curt, definitive nod. "Clear the room," I instructed. Carter immediately tapped the communications earpiece secured in his right ear. "We need the escort team in the main executive boardroom right now," he ordered, his voice calm and tactical. "We have 4 hostile trespassers requiring immediate extraction." Within 10 seconds, the heavy glass doors swung wide open. 6 massive security officers stepped into the room. These were not standard building guards. They were elite former military personnel I had hired specifically to protect my corporate assets and secure my executive staff. They wore sharp black suits and carried themselves with intimidating, lethal discipline. They swiftly formed a tight, impenetrable wall around my family. "Escort these individuals out of my building," I commanded, my voice carrying the absolute supreme authority of a chief executive officer. "If they resist or attempt to cause any further disturbance, you are authorized to involve the Chicago Police Department and press formal trespassing charges. Furthermore, they are permanently banned from entering any property owned or operated by this corporation." My mother tried to scream my name one last time, but a towering security officer immediately stepped into her line of sight, physically blocking her view of me. My father did not say a word. He simply grabbed Patricia's arm, pulling her toward the exit, knowing perfectly well that resisting a team of ex-military contractors would only result in them leaving the building in handcuffs and escalating their public humiliation. Terrence stood up from his chair, his legs trembling so badly he nearly collapsed. 2 security officers flanked him immediately, gripping him by the arms to ensure he kept moving. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with the realization that he was walking out of my building straight into a federal indictment. Caroline stumbled behind him, sobbing loudly into her hands, completely stripped of her suburban vanity. I walked out of the conference room and stood near the polished reception desk, watching the extraction unfold. The walk of shame was absolutely spectacular. The security team marched my parents, my sister, and my brother-in-law straight through the center of the massive corporate bullpen. Dozens of my highly paid employees had stopped working entirely. The senior data analysts, the software engineers, and my legal compliance team all stood at their desks watching the pathetic procession with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. My staff knew exactly who these people were. They had heard my mother's unhinged screaming through the glass. They had seen the vicious social media posts spreading online. Now they were watching the perpetrators being forcefully ejected like common criminals. My mother tried to hide her face behind her designer handbag, her country club pride utterly decimated by the intense public scrutiny. Caroline kept her head down, weeping, as she was marched past the brilliant professionals who worked for the little sister she had always relentlessly despised. Terrence looked like a dead man walking stripped of all his arrogant swagger, shuffling forward under the tight grip of the security guards. I stood tall, watching them approach the heavy steel elevator doors. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel any lingering sorrow or familial guilt. I felt an incredible soaring sense of absolute liberation. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation had been completely pulverized into dust. The elevator doors slid open with a soft mechanical chime. The security team pushed the 4 of them inside, crowding the cab to ensure there were no last-minute outbursts. My father looked up, meeting my gaze one final time across the expansive office floor. His eyes held a desperate, silent plea for mercy. I did not offer him a single shred of comfort. I simply maintained my cold, steady stare, holding my head high, until the heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting them off from my world forever. The immediate silence that followed was profound. My employees slowly returned to their desks, a renewed sense of fierce loyalty and deep respect palpable in the room. They had just watched their chief executive officer ruthlessly execute a corporate and personal victory without breaking a single sweat. I walked back into my private corner office and closed the door. The toxic family dynamic was officially dead and buried. The financial ambush had been completely neutralized. I took my seat at my desk, pulled up the secure encrypted dossier on Terrence's massive fraud, and prepared to deliver the final lethal blow to the federal authorities. The emotional war was over, but the absolute total annihilation of their fake empire was just beginning. 2 weeks had passed since I had my family physically ejected from my corporate headquarters. In that short amount of time, Terrence had grown completely desperate. With his bank accounts frozen, his original investors breathing down his neck, and his fraudulent enterprise actively collapsing, he decided to execute the classic final maneuver of a cornered financial criminal. He organized an incredibly lavish Christmas fundraising gala at the most exclusive country club in the North Shore. The glossy gold foil invitations promised an elite investment opportunity wrapped in high society holiday philanthropy. In reality, it was a frantic last-ditch effort to collect untraceable liquid cash from gullible suburbanites so he and Caroline could board a private charter and flee to a country without an extradition treaty. The country club ballroom was dripping in ostentatious fake wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers reflected off towering artificial pine trees, dusted with faux snow, and giant glittering ice sculptures carved into the shapes of dollar signs. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated smoothly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive champagne and imported caviar. It was a perfectly staged, grand illusion designed to make his victims feel wealthy and secure, while he quietly robbed them blind right under the mistletoe. My parents, William and Patricia, were naturally working the room, acting as the ultimate social validators for Terrence's criminal scam. They had polished their fake smiles to an absolute shine. Patricia wore a heavy emerald green gown, chatting loudly with the wives of local surgeons and real estate developers, bragging about non-existent family successes. William stood by the glowing ice bar, holding a tumbler of scotch, projecting the flawless image of a relaxed, successful patriarch. They were literally standing on the absolute edge of massive federal indictments and impending bank foreclosure. Yet they were still desperately clinging to their pathetic country club status, playing their assigned roles in this massive fraud. I did not receive an invitation to this extravagant, fraudulent affair. I did not need one. When you legally own over 85% of the host's financial debt through a corporate shell company, you can walk through any door you choose. I stepped out of my chauffeured black SUV and handed the keys to the valet. Tonight, I was not dressing down in simple sweaters to protect my mother's fragile ego or avoid her petty jealousy. I wore a breathtaking, backless crimson Alexander McQueen gown that fit my body like liquid armor. I paired it with diamond drop earrings that caught the holiday lights with blinding, absolute clarity. I looked exactly like what I was, which was a multi-million-dollar chief executive officer who owned the entire room before she even stepped inside. Harrison walked closely beside me, looking exceptionally lethal in a bespoke charcoal tuxedo. He carried a slim black leather portfolio tucked neatly under his arm. That portfolio did not contain festive holiday greetings or investment brochures. It contained the final federal warrants and the undeniable forensic proof of Terrence's offshore flight risks. We walked past the velvet ropes, completely ignoring the startled guest list checker, and handed our heavy winter coats to the stunned cloakroom attendant. The heavy mahogany double doors of the grand ballroom swung open, and we stepped directly into the glittering center of Terrence's final desperate hustle. The effect of our entrance was immediate and absolutely cinematic. A live jazz quartet was playing a smooth holiday melody in the corner, but the conversation near the main entrance abruptly died. Heads turned. Champagne glasses paused mid-air. The local high society crowd recognized a massive power shift when they saw one, even if they did not fully understand it yet. Patricia was mid-sentence, holding a crystal flute, when her eyes locked on to me. The color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. The champagne flute slipped right through her manicured fingers and shattered violently against the polished marble floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed loudly, making several wealthy guests jump in surprise. William turned quickly to see what caused the commotion and completely froze his face, turning a sickly, terrible shade of ash gray. Across the expansive room, Terence was standing on a small, elevated platform, preparing to deliver his grand investment pitch to a crowd of eager, wealthy marks. He wore a plush velvet tuxedo jacket, his charismatic charm turned up to the absolute maximum. Then he saw me standing by the entrance, draped in crimson silk and dripping in real diamonds, with the most ruthless corporate litigator in Chicago right by my side. Terrence's confident salesman's smile vanished instantly. His large hand gripped the microphone stand so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He looked exactly like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming freight train. Caroline, who was standing right next to the stage, actually let out a loud, audible gasp, stepping backward in her designer heels and bumping hard into a passing waiter. I did not cause a scene. I did not yell or point fingers or throw a drink. I simply offered my terrified family a cold, brilliant smile and took a fresh glass of champagne from a passing silver tray. I linked my arm gracefully through Harrison's, and we began to slowly glide through the crowded festive ballroom. I intentionally walked toward the most influential investors in the room, the exact people Terrence was actively trying to scam tonight. I warmly greeted hospital board members I knew from my own legitimate corporate dealings, shaking their hands and asking about their families. I smiled at local politicians and real estate moguls, making my presence known to every single high net worth individual in the building. I was letting Terrence watch me casually mingle with his prey, wrapping the invisible legal noose tighter and tighter around his neck with every conversation. He was completely trapped on that stage, forced to watch his executioner enjoy a glass of vintage champagne while the clock ticked down to his absolute, total destruction. He knew the money he desperately needed to escape was standing right in front of him, and he could not touch a single penny of it. The gala had officially turned into his financial funeral, and I had secured the front row seat. Terrence managed to tear his eyes away from me and focus desperately back on his wealthy audience. He tapped his crystal champagne flute, grabbing the attention of the entire glittering ballroom. The smooth jazz quartet faded into total silence. Terrence flashed his signature brilliant smile, but it was visibly strained, his facial muscles twitching with barely contained panic. He launched into his grand, charismatic pitch, speaking loudly about exclusive high-yield returns, offshore expansion, and the unparalleled monumental success of his private investment fund. He raised his glass high in the air, proposing a toast to the magnificent future of his absolute financial empire. He asked the room full of millionaires to join him in this incredibly lucrative journey, completely unaware that his journey was about to end abruptly in a federal holding cell. He never even got to take a single sip of his expensive champagne. The heavy mahogany doors at all four corners of the grand ballroom swung open simultaneously with a deafening, violent crash. A massive wave of men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers with bright yellow FBI and SEC lettering boldly printed across their backs poured into the venue. They moved with absolute terrifying military precision, quickly fanning out to secure every single exit and blocking the elevators. The wealthy suburbanites gasped, clutching their pearls and spilling their premium drinks, as the sheer harsh reality of a federal raid completely shattered the elegant holiday atmosphere. The lead federal agent, an imposing man with a stern, unyielding expression, marched straight down the center aisle directly toward the elevated stage. Terrence froze completely, his champagne glass slipping from his trembling hand and shattering violently on the hard stage floor. He looked like all the blood had been violently drained from his body. The agent stepped up onto the platform and grabbed Terrence roughly by the shoulder, spinning him around to face the shocked crowd. "Terrence Williams," the agent announced, his deep, authoritative voice projecting clearly across the dead-silent ballroom without any need for a microphone. "You are under arrest for severe wire fraud, securities fraud, and operating a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. You have the right to remain silent." The cold, heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs, locking tightly around Terrence's wrists, echoed through the cavernous room like a gunshot. The slick, arrogant investment manager who had bullied me at the Thanksgiving table was suddenly reduced to a pathetic, cowering criminal. I stood securely next to Harrison, sipping my vintage champagne and watching the absolute destruction unfold with pure, icy satisfaction. The extensive forensic dossier we had compiled using the massive debt I purchased had triggered a rapid, massive federal response. We had handed the Securities and Exchange Commission a perfectly mapped out criminal enterprise, complete with fake bank statements, offshore routing numbers, and the exact desperate emails Terrence sent to my father. The federal agents did not have to search for the evidence because I had gift wrapped it for them with absolute lethal precision. Terrence was being marched right off his own stage, humiliated, stripped of his fake power, and paraded like a common street thief in front of the exact high society crowd he had desperately tried to impress and scam. Caroline completely lost her mind. The perfect, pristine older sister who had spent her entire life mocking my career and looking down her nose at my existence completely unraveled in a matter of seconds. She lunged forward, trying to grab her husband's arm, but two female federal agents immediately blocked her path, pushing her back firmly. Caroline let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream that tore through the silent ballroom. She thrashed wildly against the agents, her immaculate blonde hair falling into a messy, chaotic tangle around her face. Her expensive designer gown snagged under a heavy wooden chair, tearing audibly as she physically collapsed onto the polished marble floor. She pounded her fists against the cold stone, wailing uncontrollably, her heavy dark makeup running down her face in thick black streams. The arrogant suburban trophy wife was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic broken woman screaming on the ground, while her entire fake luxury lifestyle evaporated into thin air. Across the room, my parents, William and Patricia, stood perfectly still, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their public destruction. Patricia was gripping the edge of a massive ice sculpture, her knuckles stark white, her mouth hanging wide open in silent, unadulterated horror. William looked like he was about to suffer a massive cardiac event, his chest heaving violently as he stared at his golden son-in-law being dragged away in handcuffs. The wealthy country club friends they had spent decades trying to impress, the surgeons, the lawyers, the local politicians, were actively backing away from them. The guests were whispering furiously among themselves, pointing fingers, and casting looks of sheer absolute disgust directly at my parents. In that exact moment, my parents finally realized the absolute gravity of their catastrophic situation. The federal government was officially seizing all of Terrence's assets, which meant the money they had desperately hoped to use to save their foreclosed mansion was gone forever. They had literally bet their home, their retirement, and their entire social standing on a criminal fraud, and they had lost absolutely everything. They were officially broke, entirely exposed, and thoroughly publicly shamed. They had instantly become the ultimate laughingstock of the entire Chicago elite. I watched my mother slowly turn her head, her terrified, panic-stricken eyes seeking me out across the crowded ballroom. She looked at me with a desperate, silent plea for salvation. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single ounce of comfort. I simply raised my champagne glass in a silent, chilling toast to her absolute ruin. I turned my back on them, taking Harrison's arm, and walked calmly out of the ballroom, leaving them to drown permanently in the chaotic, humiliating mess they had eagerly created for themselves. 6 months is exactly how long it takes for a massive federal indictment to completely dismantle a fake luxury empire. Terrence traded his custom-tailored velvet tuxedos for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit at a high-security federal penitentiary. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and massive money laundering just to avoid a life sentence. He is currently serving 20 years locked inside a tiny concrete cell, entirely stripped of his gold watches, his stolen wealth, and his arrogant swagger. The man who tried to steal my health data firm now makes 30 cents an hour working in the prison laundry room. Caroline did not fare much better in the aftermath of her husband's absolute destruction. The federal government swiftly seized absolutely everything she owned to pay back the furious, defrauded investors. Her designer wardrobes, her diamond tennis bracelets, and her leased luxury vehicles were all ruthlessly auctioned off by the state. She was forced to file for total legal bankruptcy. The former ultimate suburban trophy wife, who used to publicly mock my career on social media, is now working part-time shifts at a discount retail clothing store. She spends her long, exhausting days folding cheap sweaters and ringing up clearance coupons for the exact same country club women she used to desperately try to impress. She has been completely erased from the high society life she thought she permanently deserved. My parents, William and Patricia, faced the most poetic and devastating justice of all. Without the stolen money from Terrence's collapsed Ponzi scheme, their massive secondary mortgage defaulted entirely. The bank moved forward with the aggressive foreclosure they had tried so maliciously to avoid. I did not lift a single finger to stop the legal proceedings. They were formally evicted by the county sheriff and forced to pack their remaining meager belongings into cheap cardboard boxes. They moved into a cramped, dark, and severely run-down apartment complex on the far industrial outskirts of the city. The wealthy friends they had gladly sacrificed me to impress completely abandoned them, refusing to associate with the disgraced parents of a convicted federal fraudster. When their beloved sprawling Tudor-style mansion finally went up for public foreclosure auction, I made absolutely sure I was the highest and most aggressive bidder. I purchased my childhood home entirely in clean, untraceable cash through my Zenith Financial Acquisitions shell company. But I did not buy the massive estate to save their suburban legacy or to hand the keys back to them. I bought the property to completely and utterly erase their legacy from the face of the earth. The very first thing I did after receiving the official property deed was hire a massive commercial demolition crew. I stood on the front lawn, wearing my tailored designer coat, and watched the heavy yellow bulldozers tear straight through my mother's pristine manicured garden. I listened to the roaring diesel engines as the heavy steel blades ripped up the exact soil where my parents used to force me to pull weeds on my hands and knees for hours on end, while Caroline laid nearby on a luxury lounge chair, working on her summer tan. I watched the physical representation of their toxic favoritism and lifelong cruelty get crushed into useless dirt and shattered stone. I hired a team of elite commercial architects to completely gut the interior of the mansion. We tore down the suffocating formal dining room where they had tried to trap me into signing away my multi-million-dollar company on Thanksgiving night. We smashed the expensive crystal chandeliers and ripped up the imported rugs. In their place, we installed sleek, modern glass walls, high-tech presentation screens, and open-concept collaborative workspaces. I officially transformed the dark, oppressive house into the Zenith Training Center for young female leaders. It became an exclusive, vibrant corporate retreat dedicated entirely to funding, educating, and empowering brilliant young women in the technology and healthcare sectors. Today, I am standing on the sprawling master balcony of the newly renovated estate. The freezing, bitter winter winds of that terrible Thanksgiving night have been entirely replaced by the warm, bright sun of early summer. I am holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, leaning comfortably against the sleek glass railing and looking down at the magnificent, thriving property below me. The newly landscaped grounds are completely filled with vibrant, energetic life. But it is not the toxic, fake high society crowd my parents used to host. The expansive garden is currently filled with dozens of the sharpest, most innovative female executives, data scientists, and software developers from my corporation. They are laughing loudly, sharing brilliant ideas, and building absolute financial empires of their own. They are my chosen family. They are the people who actually respect my mind, value my intense contributions, and stand by me with fierce, unyielding loyalty. I take a slow, satisfying sip of the cold champagne, letting the crisp taste wash over me as I look out over the brilliant, successful women gathering below. I did not just survive the brutal, toxic fire my biological family tried to burn me in. I walked directly into the center of their flames, took absolute tactical control of the inferno, and used it to forge an impenetrable multi-million-dollar fortress of my own. They tried to force me to play their rigged, twisted game of suburban submission. Instead, I completely bought the board, flipped the table, and permanently rewrote every single rule. Society often conditions us to believe that family loyalty is an unbreakable vow, even when it becomes a dangerous weapon used against us. The story we just witnessed completely shatters this illusion. It teaches us a profound lesson that sharing biology does not give anyone the right to exploit your hard work, manipulate your emotions, or demand your absolute submission. When toxic relatives use guilt and fake affection to drain your resources, walking away is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. True freedom begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding your worth. Building your own empire requires ruthless focus and the undeniable courage to sever dead weight. You do not win by crying or begging for parental love. You win by maintaining cold, calculated emotional detachment and fully leveraging your own independence. Financial and emotional self-reliance are the absolute ultimate shields against gaslighting and manipulation. When abusers attempt to convince you that you are the villain for simply protecting your own assets, you must let their pathetic narrative fall on deaf ears. Your mental peace and professional integrity are worth infinitely more than their fake societal prestige. Finally, the most empowering takeaway is that you possess the absolute supreme authority to rewrite the rules of your entire life. You do not have to sit at a table where you are secretly despised and constantly undermined. You can stand up, walk out, and build your own table. A chosen family composed of people who genuinely respect your mind, value your contributions, and fiercely protect your peace is far more valuable than biological relatives who only view you as a sacrificial lamb for their own greedy mistakes. You are the sole architect of your destiny. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away from a toxic environment to protect your own peace and success? Share your incredible journey of resilience in the comments below, and please hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of absolute triumph.